My ex-husband's new wife stole my seat at my son's graduation. She laughed in my face, telling me that his real mother could watch from the back of the room. My ex-husband did absolutely nothing to defend me. After 18 years of working double shifts to raise the valedictorian, I did not scream or cause a scene. I simply stood by the exit doors. But when my son took the podium, he did not smile for their cameras. He folded his carefully written speech pointed directly at his stepmother and said one single thing that made her go deathly pale. Before I tell you how 18 years of quiet sacrifice culminated in the ultimate revenge, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and please subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to be your family. The air conditioning in the prestigious Atlanta High School auditorium was working overtime, but I could still feel the heat of humiliation burning the back of my neck. I stood at the edge of the front row holding a dozen blue roses wrapped in silver paper. Those were my son's school colors. I had arrived 45 minutes early just to make sure I had time to soak in the moment. Instead, I found myself staring at the placard taped to the velvet chair. It clearly read, Nia Carter, mother of the valedictorian. Sitting directly on top of my name was Vanessa. She was 28 years old, wearing a tailored white designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, and crossing her legs as if she owned the entire building. She was my ex-husband's new wife of 2 years, and she had spent every second of those 2 years trying to erase my existence. "Excuse me, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice low and steady so the other parents would not stare. "That is my assigned seat. I am his mother." Vanessa did not even bother to look up from her phone. She simply adjusted her oversized sunglasses, which she was wearing indoors for some ridiculous reason, and let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. "Oh, Nia, please do not start with the drama today. We have a very specific image we need to project for the school board and the local press. You can find somewhere else to sit." I tightened my grip on the bouquet of roses. "I paid for his entire tuition at this school," I replied, refusing to back down. "I spent 18 years earning the right to sit in that chair. Move." Before Vanessa could respond, a hand shoved me roughly by the shoulder. I stumbled back slightly and looked up into the glaring eyes of Sarah. Sarah was my ex-husband's sister-in-law. She was a wealthy white woman from a prominent family who had always made it her personal mission to remind me that a teen mother from the south side of Atlanta did not belong in their distinguished family tree. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Nia, lower your voice," Sarah scoffed, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "Do you have any idea how important this day is for our family? Andre is about to close a massive corporate deal next week. Vanessa provides the stable, sophisticated two-parent household image that the media wants to see. You are just a caterer, a single woman who smells like cooking oil. Let the adults handle the VIP section." I stared at Sarah, completely appalled by her audacity. She stood there dripping in diamonds, acting like she was the gatekeeper to my own son's success. But before I could put her in her place, a heavy hand grabbed my arm and pulled me backward. It was Andre. My ex-husband was sweating despite the cool air in the auditorium. He wore a custom-tailored suit that I knew for a fact he could not afford. He had walked out on Trey and me 3 years ago, claiming that family life was stifling his potential, and he had not paid a single dime of child support in 24 months. Yet here he was, ready to take all the credit for the valedictorian. "Nia, stop making a scene," Andre hissed through his teeth, looking around frantically to see if anyone was watching us. "The mayor is sitting 3 rows behind us. Do not embarrass me in front of these people." "Embarrass you?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Andre, that is my seat. I am the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning helping him study. I am the one who worked catering gigs every weekend to pay for his advanced placement exams while you were flying your girlfriend to Paris. I belong in that seat." Andre rolled his eyes and leaned in close, his voice dripping with venom. "Nobody cares about what you did in the background, Nia. Today is about optics. You showing up here trying to claim the spotlight is just pathetic. Go find a seat in the general admission bleachers in the back. Do not be ghetto." That word hit me like a physical blow. Ghetto. It was the code word they always used when they wanted to shut me down, to make me feel small, to remind me of where I came from. 18 years of scrubbing floors, catering exhausting events, and sacrificing every single ounce of my personal life, all reduced to a slur by a man who was living on borrowed time and borrowed money. I looked at Vanessa, who was smirking triumphantly. I looked at Sarah, crossing her arms with superiority. I did not scream. I turned and walked to the very back of the auditorium, standing in the shadows. Finally, the principal called our valedictorian. Trey walked onto the stage. He scanned the front row, realizing I was missing. Then his gaze found me. The heavy silence in the massive auditorium felt suffocating as my son leaned closer to the microphone. The school principal stepped forward, gesturing nervously toward the teleprompter, trying to prompt Trey to begin the sanitized, pre-approved speech we had all read in the commencement program. Trey completely ignored him. He lifted the crisp white papers of his speech, folded them deliberately in half, and then folded them again. With a sharp, decisive motion, he shoved the papers deep into the pocket of his graduation gown. A quiet murmur rippled through the thousands of parents and students sitting in the crowd. People shifted in their seats, sensing that something unscripted was about to happen. I was supposed to stand up here today and talk to all of you about the future. Trey began, his voice echoing powerfully through the sound system bouncing off the high ceilings. I was instructed to deliver a polite monologue about chasing our dreams and thanking the village that raised us. But just a few hours ago, my stepmother Vanessa pulled me aside in the hallway. She told me that I needed to use my time on this stage to publicly thank her and my father for my perfect grade point average. She said it was crucial for their image. Down in the VIP section, the shift in energy was instantaneous. Andre puffed out his chest, adjusting his expensive tie, clearly assuming this was the prelude to the grand tribute he felt he deserved. Vanessa flashed a brilliant rehearsed smile for the local press photographers who were hovering near the stage, crossing her legs perfectly for the cameras. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully erased me from my own son's life story. Which is actually hilarious. Trey continued, his tone dropping to a chillingly calm register. Considering my stepmother spent the last 3 years flying first class to Dubai and Paris, completely draining the college fund my father supposedly set up for me. The moment those words left Trey's mouth, the memory hit me with the force of a runaway freight train. It was a freezing Tuesday afternoon, exactly 2.5 years ago. I had just finished a grueling, mind-numbing 14-hour catering shift at a corporate retreat. My feet were throbbing in cheap orthopedic shoes, and my uniform smelled heavily of roasted garlic and industrial bleach. I had sat down at my bruised kitchen table, opened my battered laptop, and logged into our joint banking portal. I had intended to transfer my hard-earned tip money, $300 in crumpled bills I had just deposited, into Trey's dedicated college savings account. Instead, I stared at a digital screen that made my blood run entirely cold. The account balance, which I had painstakingly built up to $45,000 over 15 years of skipped lunches, canceled vacations, and thrift store clothing, read exactly zero. Pure, suffocating panic had seized my throat. I frantically clicked through the recent transaction history, my eyes scanning the devastating ledger in absolute disbelief. There were massive unauthorized wire transfers to a boutique luxury travel agency in Buckhead. There were exorbitant 5-figure charges at high-end jewelers, elite bridal boutiques, and a luxury car dealership. Andre had systematically, ruthlessly siphoned every single dime of our son's hard-earned future to fund his desperate, pathetic attempts to impress Vanessa. When I confronted him that evening, he didn't even have the basic human decency to look ashamed. He stood in the cramped kitchen of our modest apartment, casually adjusting his expensive silk tie, and coldly told me that the stolen money was an essential investment in his corporate image. He audaciously claimed that securing a younger, more sophisticated partner would drastically elevate his social status, which would eventually trickle down to benefit Trey in the long run. It was the most disgusting, narcissistic rationalization I had ever heard in my entire life. That was the exact night he packed his designer bags, walked out the front door without even saying goodbye to his son, and filed for a rushed divorce. He left me with a mountain of shared household debt and a deeply shattered teenage boy. I didn't cry that night, I didn't break down, and I certainly didn't beg him to stay. Instead, a cold, diamond-hard resolve crystallized deep in my chest. While Andre was busy popping champagne in first-class cabins to Dubai playing the role of a wealthy bachelor, I sat in the dark, opened my laptop, and began obsessively researching commercial real estate foreclosures. I took the remaining $5,000 I had secretly hidden in a separate private emergency fund, money he knew absolutely nothing about, and purchased a derelict abandoned warehouse on the absolute worst street in South Atlanta. I scrubbed the floors with my own two hands, sleeping on a thin mattress on the freezing concrete between my weekend catering shifts. I flipped that building to a commercial logistics company 6 months later for triple the purchase price. Every time my muscles ached, every time my bank account dipped dangerously low, every single time I wanted to give up, I closed my eyes and thought of that zero balance in Trey's college account. I channeled every ounce of my betrayal, my profound humiliation, and my fierce protective maternal rage into a singular, unstoppable focus. Vanguard Holdings wasn't just a random business venture. It was a towering monument built entirely on the ashes of Andre's devastating betrayal. Now standing by the exit doors and hearing Trey speak that agonizing truth into a microphone in front of thousands of wealthy parents, I felt the circle finally close. The entire auditorium gasped collectively. The brilliant smile vanished from Vanessa's face so fast, it looked as if she had been physically struck. Andre sat entirely frozen in his velvet chair, his eyes bulging as the reality of what was happening began to set in. Whispers erupted from the rows behind them. The mayor of Atlanta, sitting just 3 rows back, leaned over to whisper something to his wife. "My dad likes to tell everyone at his exclusive country club that he is a self-made corporate success." Trey's voice rose, vibrating with a fierce protective anger that I had never heard from him before. "He likes to brag about his wealth and his status, but he somehow always forgets to mention the 18 years my real mother Nia worked grueling double shifts as a corporate caterer, just so he could afford to finish his business degree. He forgets to mention that while he was busy buying luxury cars for his new wife, my mom was staying up all night learning complex coding languages just so she could tutor me in advanced calculus." Sarah covered her mouth with her manicured hand in absolute horror, shrinking back into her seat as the wealthy families around them began to stare. Andre turned pale, gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He opened his mouth to say something, to shout to stop the speech, but the principal was too stunned to cut the microphone. Trey raised his hand and pointed straight down at the VIP section. "You can steal her assigned seat for a cheap photo opportunity, Vanessa, but you cannot steal her legacy. You cannot steal her hard work, and you absolutely cannot steal my respect for the woman who actually raised me." Then Trey lifted his gaze from the front row and looked straight down the center aisle. His eyes locked onto mine where I stood in the shadows by the exit doors. The fierce anger in his face melted into a look of profound, unwavering love. "Mom, I see you standing back there," Trey said, his voice cracking slightly with emotion before he steadied it. "This one is for you. Every late night, every burned dinner because you were too tired to stay awake, every single sacrifice you made. I saw it all. You are my hero and I love you more than words can say." Tears streamed down my face hotly and quickly. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle the sob that clawed at my throat. My heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost knocked me over right there in the doorway. He knew. He had seen every struggle, and he refused to let them bury it. Trey turned his attention back to the front row, locking eyes with Andre one final time. "And Dad, you do not need to worry about my college tuition anymore. You do not need to pretend you have the money to support me. Stanford University gave me a full academic ride." The crowd began to buzz, a wave of excitement building in the bleachers among the graduating class. "And just for the record," Trey concluded, leaning into the microphone with a sharp, victorious smirk, "I filed all my university applications and secured that full-ride scholarship entirely under my mother's maiden name." The auditorium completely erupted. It was not polite, scattered applause. It was a massive, roaring, standing ovation from the students, the teachers, and the parents who had just witnessed the absolute destruction of a fake facade. The cheering was deafening. Students were standing on their chairs screaming Trey's name. Down in the front row, the devastation was absolute. Vanessa's face had lost all of its color, turning a sickly shade of gray as she stared blankly ahead. Andre looked like he was going to be physically sick, shrinking down into the seat that he had fought so hard to steal. The cameras that Vanessa had desperately wanted to impress were now snapping photos. I did not stay to watch the rest of the fallout inside the auditorium. As the flashes from the local press cameras went off, capturing the absolute shock on my ex-husband's face, I turned my back on the stage and pushed open the heavy metal exit doors. The humid Atlanta air hit me instantly, wrapping around my shoulders like a familiar blanket. I walked across the massive concrete parking lot, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the pavement. I did not rush. I had absolutely no reason to run away. I found my modest 5-year-old SUV parked near the back fence, far away from the designated VIP parking zones. I leaned against the driver's side door, clutching the bouquet of blue roses against my chest. I knew they were coming. They were predictable. I just had to wait. It took less than 10 minutes. The heavy glass doors of the main entrance banged open, and a furious trio marched out into the glaring afternoon sun. Andre led the charge, his face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. He was walking so fast, he was practically sprinting, his expensive leather shoes slapping hard against the asphalt. Right behind him was Vanessa, struggling to keep up in her towering designer heels, wiping away non-existent tears. Sarah flanked them on the right, her jaw tightly clenched, radiating an aura of offended privilege. "You manipulative witch!" Andre roared, not caring at all about the other families who were beginning to spill out into the parking lot. He closed the distance between us, stopping just inches from my face. "You put him up to this. You fed him a bunch of bitter lies and told him to humiliate me in front of the entire city council." I did not flinch. I looked at the man I had spent my youth supporting, and I felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. "I did not say a single word to him, Andre," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly calm. "Trey is 18 years old. He has his own eyes. He has his own brain. He sees exactly who you are, and he sees exactly what you have done to us." "Do not play games with me, Nia!" Andre shouted, spittle flying from his lips. He pointed a shaking finger right at my chest. "You deliberately orchestrated this little ghetto smear campaign to ruin my reputation. I have partners from Vanguard Holdings inside that building. Do you have any idea what you just cost me? You ruined my life. I am going to call my lawyers tomorrow morning. I will sue you for parental alienation. I will drag you through the family courts until you have absolutely nothing left." Vanessa stepped out from behind Andre's broad shoulders, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. She forced a dramatic trembling sob, making sure her voice was loud enough for the passing crowds to hear her performance. "How could you be so cruel, Nia?" Vanessa cried out, her face contorted in fake agony. "I tried so hard to be a good stepmother to Trey. I opened my heart to that boy. I wanted us to be a beautiful blended family. But you just could not handle the fact that Andre upgraded. You had to poison your own son's mind out of pure jealousy because you are so bitter and alone." I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to respond to Vanessa's ridiculous theatrical display, but Sarah aggressively stepped right in front of her. Sarah smoothed down her pristine silk skirt, looking at me as if I were a piece of garbage that had blown onto her impeccably manicured lawn. "Save your breath, Vanessa." Sarah scoffed, her voice dripping with sheer condescension. "You cannot reason with people like her. This is exactly why you will always be classless trash, Nia. You raised a disrespectful, angry boy who has no concept of gratitude or decorum. Andre gave you people his reputable name, he elevated you from the gutter, and this is how you repay him, by throwing a public tantrum like a common street thug." Sarah crossed her arms, raising her chin to look down her nose at me. "You will never understand how real society works. In our world, we protect the family image. We support our husbands. We do not air our dirty laundry in public because we actually have class. But I suppose you cannot expect a woman who spends her weekends catering for minimum wage to comprehend basic social etiquette. You are exactly where you belong, Nia. Leaning against a cheap car standing in the back of the parking lot, completely alone. For 18 years, I had swallowed my pride. I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. I had allowed people like Sarah and Andre to talk down to me because I believed that silent endurance was the only way to protect my son from their toxicity. I had let them control the narrative, letting them paint me as the struggling, desperate ex-wife while they paraded around Atlanta, pretending to be high society royalty. But Trey was 18 now. He had just stood on a stage and fought for me. He had boldly spoken the truth, and he had freed me from the invisible chains of this toxic family dynamic. I did not have to bite my tongue ever again. I stopped leaning against my car door. I stood up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back. I looked at Andre's furious, sweating face. I looked at Vanessa's fake, trembling pout. Finally, I locked eyes with Sarah. The condescending sneer was still plastered across her perfectly bronzed face. I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that held absolutely no warmth. I uncurled my fingers and let my car keys drop heavily into the bottom of my leather purse. I turned my body so I was facing Sarah, directly preparing to drop the first hidden bomb they never saw coming. You have always loved the sound of your own voice, Sarah. I began, my tone stripped of the polite deference I had used for nearly 2 decades. You stand in designer silk dresses and lecture me about high society generational wealth and true class. You have spent 18 years treating me like an unwanted stray dog that wandered into your pristine world. But the irony of your arrogance is that your perfect world is nothing but a fragile house of cards. Sarah let out a sharp scoff, glancing quickly at Andre as if expecting him to intervene. When he remained frozen, she turned her glaring eyes back to me. I have no idea what you are rambling about, Nia. My family has been a pillar of the Atlanta community for 4 generations. We do not have to prove our social standing to a bitter caterer having a public mental breakdown. You are embarrassing yourself. Am I? I took a deliberate step toward her, watching the defensive tightening of her jaw. Because if I recall correctly, the pillar of your precious Atlanta community was crumbling straight to the ground exactly 3 years ago. Do you remember the autumn of 2021, Sarah? Do you remember when your husband made that foolish investment that went completely bankrupt? Sarah's bronzed face lost a fraction of its color. She swallowed hard but kept her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Every businessman experiences minor market fluctuations, she stated defensively, her voice trembling just slightly. Marcus resolved that issue quietly and professionally. It is none of your business. A minor market fluctuation, I repeated, letting out a short, humorless laugh that echoed across the hot asphalt. Sarah, you and Marcus were hit with a massive federal tax lien by the Internal Revenue Service. The government was preparing to seize your bank accounts and put your beloved $4 million Buckhead estate up for public auction. You were exactly 48 hours away from being thrown onto the street. Andre whipped his head around to stare at his sister-in-law, his eyes wide with utter shock. Sarah, what is she talking about? Andre demanded, completely clueless. Marcus never said a single word to me about any federal tax liens or facing a foreclosure. Of course he did not tell you, Andre. I said, not breaking eye contact with the panicking woman in front of me. Because the men in this family are terrified of looking like failures. They would rather drown in debt than admit they lack the money to fund their extravagant lifestyles. Marcus kept it a secret from everyone in the family. He knew that losing that house meant losing your country club memberships, your social status, and your entire identity. Sarah uncrossed her arms, her manicured fingers twitching nervously at her sides. Marcus secured a private bridge loan from an anonymous angel investor. She stammered, her voice losing its haughty edge and slipping into genuine panic. We paid off the taxes in full. The bank released the deed. You are just making up wild stories to rattle me. I am not making up anything, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, chilling whisper. I know all about that anonymous angel investor, Sarah, because I am the one who signed the cashier's check. The silence that fell over the parking lot was absolute and suffocating. Sarah stopped breathing entirely. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers and her mouth fell open in a silent, horrified gasp. "That is right." I continued pressing my advantage as her world shattered. "While you were busy making snide comments about my uniform smelling like grease, I took the massive profits from my ghetto catering company and used them to save your miserable life." Marcus came to me begging on his hands and knees. He knew I had secured major corporate catering contracts and had cash. I gave him the $200,000 he needed to pay off the government and keep your Buckhead estate from being auctioned off. Sarah shook her head wildly, refusing to accept the devastating truth. "No, no, that is impossible. You do not have that kind of money. You are just a caterer. You are lying. I used a private holding company to wire the funds so your delicate pride would not be wounded by taking charity from a black single mother." I explained methodically, watching tears of humiliation well up in her eyes. "You owe your house, your status, and your entire fake generational wealth facade to me. Every time you host one of your elite garden parties, you are standing on grass that I paid to keep. You are doing it from a pedestal that I bought with my hard work. You are a hypocrite living on my charity." Sarah physically staggered backward as if I had shoved her. She covered her mouth with both hands, a muffled sob escaping her throat. The sheer weight of the humiliation crushed her aristocratic posture, leaving her looking small, pathetic, and entirely defeated. She could not formulate a single word of defense because she knew I possessed the undeniable financial records to prove it. Suddenly, a high-pitched, nervous giggle broke the heavy tension. Vanessa covered her mouth, trying to stifle her amusement, but a loud snort escaped her glossy lips. She looked at Sarah's devastated face and actually began to laugh completely, failing to read the severity of the situation. "Oh my goodness, Sarah," Vanessa chuckled, pointing a manicured finger at her sister-in-law. "You have been acting like you are the Queen of Atlanta this entire time, and you are secretly living off Nia's leftover catering tips. That is the most embarrassing thing I have ever heard in my life. I cannot believe you tried to lecture me about high society when you are begging for handouts." Vanessa flipped her blonde extensions over her shoulder, smiling smugly, as if she had just won a major victory. She clearly thought my wrath was entirely focused on Sarah, completely oblivious to the fact that her own life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. I turned my head slowly, shifting my gaze away from the weeping Sarah and locking my eyes directly onto Vanessa. The smug smile on her face was exactly what I had been waiting for. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute calm that washed over my mind. "I am so glad you find financial ruin entertaining, Vanessa," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously polite, "because your situation is actually significantly worse." Vanessa's laughter died instantly. The smug expression slid off her face, replaced by a defensive scowl. She crossed her arms, clutching her handbag tightly against her chest, as if to protect herself. Vanessa demanded, "My situation is perfect. Andre and I closed on a $2 million mansion. We flew to Dubai for our anniversary. I drove here in a brand new Porsche Panamera. Do not project your pathetic life onto me because you are jealous." "I am looking right at that beautiful car," I replied, gesturing toward the vehicle parked illegally near the entrance. "It is stunning." "But Vanessa, did Andre mention how that car was acquired? Did he say he bought it outright with corporate bonuses, like he brags about online?" Andre lunged forward, his face turning crimson. "Nia, shut your mouth," he bellowed. "Do not say another word." "I crossed the line the moment you told me to sit in the back, Andre." I fired back, keeping my gaze on his wife. "Vanessa, you should pay closer attention to the paperwork you sign. That pristine white Porsche is not owned by your husband. It is a commercial lease. More importantly, that lease is 90 days past due." Vanessa gasped, shaking her head frantically. "You are a liar," she shrieked. "Andre makes 6 figures. We are wealthy. You are just a bitter ex-wife trying to ruin my day." "Andre has not closed a successful deal in 8 months, I stated methodically. "He has been maxing out credit cards to keep up appearances. He took out a secondary loan to afford your vacations, destroying his credit score. He is entirely insolvent. You did not marry a wealthy executive. You married a walking debt trap wrapped in a tailored suit." Vanessa whipped her head around to look at Andre. Her eyes were wide, pleading with him to deny the accusations. Andre could not look at her. He stared down at the asphalt, sweating profusely, his silence confirming every word I had just spoken. "Tell her she is lying," Vanessa pleaded, panic setting in. "Andre, tell her we own the car. Tell her about the merger you are closing next week." "The merger will not save him," I interrupted smoothly. "Neither will that car. The private financing agency that holds the title to your Porsche sold your debt portfolio to a private equity firm last week. They have been trying to locate the vehicle for a month, but Andre hid it inside your garage." I smiled, checking the thin silver watch on my wrist. It is amazing how helpful technology can be. I sent a quick anonymous email to the recovery agency this morning, letting them know the vehicle would be parked at the high school for a public graduation ceremony. Before Vanessa could process the magnitude of my revelation, the unmistakable sound of a diesel engine rumbled through the parking lot. A massive tow truck turned the corner, its yellow lights flashing brightly. The truck bypassed the general admission spaces and headed straight for the VIP zone. It backed up swiftly, maneuvering with practiced precision until it aligned perfectly with the front bumper of Vanessa's gleaming white Porsche. "No!" Vanessa screamed, the sound tearing through the humid air. "No, you cannot take my car!" Abandoning her aristocratic posture, Vanessa hiked up her white designer dress and began sprinting across the hot asphalt, her towering heels clicking frantically against the ground. Two men hopped out of the tow truck. They moved fast, ignoring her hysterical screams. Within seconds, they secured the metal hooks underneath the front chassis of the luxury vehicle. Andre remained frozen, paralyzed by the overwhelming public humiliation. He did not chase after his crying wife. He did not run to stop the men. He just stood there watching the symbol of his fake wealth slowly lifted into the air. Several parents stopped in their tracks, pulling out smartphones to record the incredible scene unfolding in front of the school. Vanessa reached the tow truck, slamming her hands against the passenger window. "Put it down!" she sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her flawless makeup. "My purse is inside. You cannot just steal my property." The driver simply handed her a printed yellow document through the cracked window. It was the official repossession order. He rolled the window up, unbothered by her dramatic tears. The heavy hydraulic lift whined loudly, raising the front tires of the Porsche off the ground. Vanessa stood on the curb, weeping openly, looking like a shattered child who just lost her favorite toy. I watched the spectacle with a deep sense of peace. For 18 long years, I worked my fingers to the bone, silently sacrificing everything so my son could have a good life. I endured their insults, their cruel jokes, and their endless attempts to make me feel inferior. They built their identities on making me feel like nothing. Now they were standing in the parking lot with absolutely nothing left to hide behind. Sarah was still crying quietly beside Andre. Her own financial devastation was still sinking in. She could not find the energy to gloat over Vanessa's public embarrassment. The three of them formed a united toxic front against me 10 minutes ago. Now they were entirely fractured, broken by their own relentless greed and stupidity. The tow truck engine roared as the driver shifted into gear, preparing to pull the repossessed vehicle out of the school lot. Vanessa fell to her knees on the grass, sobbing into her hands. Just as the truck began to move forward, an imposing black Escalade with dark-tinted windows swerved sharply around the corner. The luxury SUV slammed on its brakes, coming to a sudden halt right in the middle of the driving lane, effectively blocking the tow truck's exit path. The heavy doors of the Escalade unlocked with a loud electronic click. The driver, wearing a dark suit, hurried around to open the rear passenger door. A heavy wooden cane with a polished silver handle struck the asphalt first. Then a pair of expensive leather shoes stepped out. Finally, the formidable figure of Mama Ruby emerged from the vehicle. She was Andre's mother, the fierce matriarch of the family, and the woman who controlled her mega-church congregation with an iron fist. She adjusted her wide-brimmed church hat, her eyes sweeping over the pathetic scene of Vanessa crying on the ground and Andre standing frozen in shock. Mama Ruby's face darkened with terrifying, furious rage. Her gaze snapped away from her ruined son and locked directly onto me. The heavy wooden cane struck the pavement with a sharp clack that cut through the humid afternoon air. Mama Ruby marched past her weeping daughter-in-law without offering a single glance of comfort. She ignored the tow truck pulling away with the repossessed luxury car. Her entire focus was pinned on me, her dark eyes narrowing with absolute authority and deep contempt. For over a decade, that look alone had been enough to make me shrink into myself to apologize for things I had not done, and to surrender my money just to keep the peace in her household. But I was no longer the terrified teenage girl seeking her approval. I stood my ground, squaring my shoulders as the matriarch stopped inches from my face. "You have always been a profound disappointment, Nia." Mama Ruby spat, her voice a harsh whisper designed to intimidate. "I welcomed you into my home when you were nothing but a fast, reckless girl. I tried to teach you grace. I tried to show you how to be a proper wife. But you were always too stubborn, too arrogant, and far too ungrateful to appreciate the blessing of bearing our family name. You could never figure out how to keep a good man happy, so he rightfully moved on to a woman who understands her place. And now you pull a stunt like this." I looked at the woman who had routinely forced me to eat in the kitchen during Thanksgiving dinners because my uniform supposedly smelled too much like grease for her formal dining room. She stood there draped in expensive fabrics that I had secretly subsidized for years. "I did not pull any stunts," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the fear she expected. "Trey spoke the absolute truth today. Andre and Vanessa have been lying to you, to the church, and to this entire city." Mama Ruby slammed the silver handle of her cane against the asphalt, her face flushing with indignation. "Do not you dare speak ill of my son, you classless little girl. Andre is a brilliant businessman. He is carrying the legacy of this family on his strong back. You are just a bitter, jealous ex-wife who wants to drag him back down into the dirt because you cannot stand to see him thriving without you." She took another aggressive step forward, invading my personal space, trying to use her physical presence to dominate the confrontation. "You are going to fix this disgrace right now, Nia. You are going to march back inside that auditorium, grab your disrespectful boy by the ear, and drag him straight to the principal's office. He is going to draft a written public apology to his father and Vanessa, and he is going to read it on video so we can distribute it to the local media. You will tell everyone that he was confused, emotional, and acting out of teenage rebellion." I let out a short, incredulous laugh. "I am not forcing my son to apologize for exposing a massive fraud. Andre is drowning in debt. He has not paid a single dime of child support in 2 years. That is the only legacy your son is carrying. You know absolutely nothing about the corporate world." Mama Ruby sneered, her lips curling into a cruel, mocking smile. "My son is not drowning in anything. Andre is exactly 1 week away from closing a multi-million-dollar corporate merger. He is partnering with Vanguard Holdings, one of the most powerful and ruthless real estate conglomerates in the entire state of Georgia. When he signs that contract next Thursday, they are going to make him a senior vice president. He is going to receive a signing bonus that is worth more than you will make in 3 lifetimes of serving cheap appetizers." Her voice grew louder, laced with a venomous, desperate pride. She pointed a manicured, jewel-encrusted finger directly at my face. "Vanguard Holdings conducts extreme, thorough background checks on all their executive partners. They demand pristine public images. If this ridiculous ghetto circus you orchestrated today ruins his corporate background check, I will personally destroy you. I sit on the board of every major megachurch and community organization in this city. If you do not make Trey retract that speech immediately, I will make a few phone calls tonight. By tomorrow morning, your little catering business will be completely blacklisted from every church, country club, and event hall in Georgia. You will never serve another plate of food in Atlanta again. You will be entirely bankrupt." I watched her chest heave as she delivered her ultimate threat. Andre had finally stopped staring at the empty space where his leased car had been. He rushed over to stand behind his mother, finding his false courage now that the matriarch was fighting his battles for him. Sarah had wiped her tears and was watching closely, hoping Mama Ruby could somehow undo the catastrophic damage I had just inflicted upon their fake, aristocratic lives. They were all waiting for me to break. They expected me to fall to my knees, beg for mercy, and promise to control my son. They believed that taking away my catering livelihood would force me back into absolute submission. Instead of panicking, I simply smiled. The calmness of my reaction caused a flicker of genuine confusion to flash across Mama Ruby's wrinkled face. I slowly unzipped the side compartment of my leather purse. I did not break eye contact with her as I reached inside. My fingers brushed past my car keys and grabbed the sleek, heavy object waiting at the bottom. "You really do not need to worry about blacklisting my catering company, Mama Ruby," I said smoothly, pulling my hand out of the purse. "I actually sold that entire business 2 years ago to focus on more lucrative ventures." I extended my hand, holding a solid gold, beautifully embossed business card. Mama Ruby snatched the heavy card from my outstretched fingers, her lips curled in a condescending, mocking sneer. She aggressively adjusted her reading glasses, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. She was fully expecting to see the name of some pathetic, small-time catering LLC ready to launch into another tirade about my lack of class. Instead, the silence in the sprawling high school parking lot became absolute and suffocating. I stood perfectly still, watching her dark, judgmental eyes scan the embossed golden letters. She read them once, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. She blinked rapidly, her breathing hitching, and read them a second time. The heavy silver cane in her hand began to shake. Her mouth opened wide, forming a silent, horrified gasp, but no sound came out. The blood drained so quickly from her face that her deep complexion turned a sickly ashen gray. Her knees trembled violently beneath her expensive silk skirt. For the first time in the 18 years I had known this terrifying, domineering matriarch, she looked physically small. She had to lean heavily on her cane with both hands just to keep from collapsing straight onto the hot asphalt. "Nia Carter." Mama Ruby finally whispered, her voice entirely stripped of all its previous booming, arrogant authority. It was a raspy, terrified breath. "Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Vanguard Holdings." Andre let out a strange, choked sound like a man who had just been violently punched in the stomach. He stepped out from behind his mother's trembling shoulder, snatching the solid gold business card right out of her hand. He stared at the finely crafted letters as if they were written in an ancient alien language. The remaining color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, hollow ghost. He flipped the card over, frantically searching for a punchline that didn't exist. "No!" Andre gasped, shaking his head frantically side to side, his breathing turning into shallow, panicked wheezes. "No, this is a sick joke. This is a fake card you had printed just to humiliate me. Vanguard Holdings is a massive billion-dollar real estate conglomerate. They own half the commercial skyscrapers in downtown Atlanta. You are just a caterer, Nia. You sell baked chicken and macaroni to local churches. You scrub deep fryers. You cannot possibly be the CEO of a private equity firm." See. "I sold that catering company exactly 2 years ago, Andre," I said, stepping deliberately closer to him, savoring the sheer, unadulterated terror swimming in his wide eyes. "I took every single penny of profit from those long, grueling double shifts. While you were busy taking out high-interest secondary loans to buy designer suits you couldn't afford, I was quietly buying up distressed commercial properties on the south side of Atlanta. I bought the exact same rundown buildings in the ghetto that you and Sarah always made fun of. I renovated them, flipped them for massive profits, and reinvested every single dime. I eventually swallowed up the entire commercial real estate market in this city, moving from the south side straight into the shining glass towers of Buckhead." I paused, letting the devastating gravity of my words crush the last remaining fragments of his fragile ego. "I am the anonymous corporate entity you have been desperately trying to impress for the last 6 months. I am the silent partner who controls your firm's future. I am Vanguard Holdings." Before Andre could even process the horrifying fact that his entire career, his wealth, and his fake aristocratic identity were resting entirely in the palm of the woman he had abandoned, a frantic, high-pitched screech echoed across the pavement. Vanessa came sprinting back from the edge of the parking lot, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. The yellow tow truck carrying her pristine white Porsche had completely disappeared from view, swallowed by the busy Atlanta traffic. She looked absolutely unhinged. Her expensive blonde extensions were tangled, and dark streaks of expensive mascara ran down her flushed cheeks. She pushed past Sarah and shoved her way to the front of our chaotic circle, placing herself directly between Andre and me. She was trembling with a potent mixture of disbelief and pure rage. "You cannot do this!" Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking as she pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You cannot just waltz in here and liquidate my own husband's department. We just closed on a $2 million mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood in this whole entire city. We have a massive mortgage to pay every single month. We have real, substantial financial obligations. You cannot take away his job just because you are a bitter, jealous woman." I looked at Vanessa, marveling at her absolute delusion right now. She was standing in the very middle of a high school parking lot, screaming about a mortgage, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire reality had been a fabricated lie. I slowly placed the solid gold business card back into my leather purse and let out a soft, pitying sigh. "Vanessa, you really need to start opening the mail that comes to your house," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterical screaming with cold precision. "If you actually paid attention to your own finances instead of wasting your days posting carefully staged photos of your luxurious life on the internet, every day you would know that you do not actually have a mortgage anymore, period." Vanessa stopped shrieking immediately. She blinked rapidly, her face contorting in sheer confusion. She glanced back at Andre, who was suddenly looking everywhere except at his wife. He looked as if he wanted the hot asphalt to open up and swallow him whole. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa demanded, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Of course we have a mortgage. We signed the closing papers 6 months ago. Andre pays the bank directly from his executive accounts." "Tell her that she is crazy, Andre." Andre remained completely silent, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. I took a slow, deliberate step toward Vanessa, relishing the absolute power of this long-awaited moment. "He cannot tell you I am crazy, Vanessa, because he knows that I am telling you the absolute truth," I explained methodically. "Andre has not made a single mortgage payment on that $2 million mansion in over 90 days. He totally drained his entire savings trying to impress you with that trip to Dubai, and he completely ran out of money. You defaulted on that massive loan exactly 1 month ago. The bank immediately seized the property and quietly put the deed up for a private commercial auction just last Tuesday." Sarah gasped loudly, covering her mouth in utter shock. Mama Ruby leaned heavily on her silver cane, her eyes darting between me and her ruined son. "No," Vanessa whimpered, shaking her head in violent denial. "No, the bank would have sent warning letters. They would have called us. We live in that house. It belongs to us." "The bank did send letters," I corrected her sharply. "Dozens of them. But Andre intercepted the mail because he is a coward who could not bear to admit that he truly failed. He thought his upcoming corporate merger would provide a massive signing bonus, allowing him to secretly pay off the arrears and save his entire fake empire. But as I just clearly informed him today, that merger is dead, and so is his ownership of that property now." I paused, letting the devastating reality settle over the group. "When the bank auctioned the deed to your beautiful mansion last Tuesday, my private equity firm was the highest bidder. Vanguard Holdings purchased the entire estate for absolutely pennies on the dollar. So technically speaking, Vanessa, you are not a proud homeowner. You are currently just squatting in a house that I fully legally own." The blood drained completely from Vanessa's face. Her knees buckled slightly and she had to grab onto Andre's arm just to remain standing upright. She looked like she might actually vomit right there on the pavement. Andre finally found his voice, stepping forward with a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. "Nia, please." Andre begged, his arrogant facade completely shattered. You cannot do this to us. We have nowhere else left to go. You have millions of dollars. You have an entire real estate empire. You do not need that house. Please, just give us a little more time. I looked at the man who had abandoned me and my son without a second thought. I looked at the man who had just told me to go sit in the back of the auditorium so I would not embarrass his new sophisticated wife. I felt absolutely zero sympathy. I reached deep into my leather purse and pulled out a thick folded stack of legal papers. The top page featured a bright red official court stamp from the county sheriff's main office. I do not need the house, Andre, I said, my voice ringing with 18 years of quiet, calculated vindication. But I certainly do not need you living in it. I stepped right up to him and slapped the heavy legal document flat against his chest. He reflexively brought his hands up to grab the stack of papers before they fell onto the asphalt. That is an official court-stamped 48-hour eviction notice, I announced loudly, making sure they heard. You have exactly 2 days to vacate my property. Let us go, Trey. My son smiled, wrapping his arm around my shoulder, and we drove away. Mama Ruby snatched the heavy card from my outstretched fingers. She adjusted her reading glasses, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. The silence in the parking lot was absolute. I watched her dark eyes scan the golden letters. She read them once. She blinked rapidly and read them a second time. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her knees trembled slightly, and she had to lean heavily on her silver cane to keep her balance. Nia Carter. Mama Ruby finally whispered, her voice stripped of all its previous booming authority. Chief Executive Officer and Founder, Vanguard Holdings. Andre let out a strange, choked sound. He stepped out from behind his mother's shoulder, snatching the golden business card right out of her trembling hand. He stared at the embossed letters as if they were written in an alien language. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. No. Andre gasped, shaking his head frantically. No, this is a joke. This is a fake card. Vanguard Holdings is a massive real estate conglomerate. The chief executive officer is a silent partner who works through a board of directors. You are just a caterer, Nia. You sell baked chicken and macaroni to local churches. I sold that catering company exactly 2 years ago, Andre, I said, stepping closer to him and enjoying the sheer terror in his eyes. I took every single penny of profit from those long double shifts. I did not buy designer clothes or luxury cars like you and Vanessa. I quietly bought distressed commercial properties on the south side of Atlanta. I flipped them, reinvested the capital, and kept buying. I eventually swallowed up the entire commercial real estate market in this city. I am the silent partner you have been desperately trying to impress for the past 6 months. I am Vanguard Holdings. Sarah let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her face with her hands. Vanessa was still sitting on the grass where the tow truck had left her, staring up at me with her mouth hanging wide open. Andre physically stumbled backward. His expensive leather shoes got tangled, and he hit the side of Mama Ruby's black Escalade. He clutched his chest, struggling to pull oxygen into his lungs. The reality of his absolute destruction was finally crashing down on his arrogant shoulders. But the merger, Andre stammered, his eyes wide and pleading. We have been negotiating the merger for months. My firm told me that Vanguard Holdings wanted to partner with my specific department. They promised me a senior vice president position. They promised me a 7-figure signing bonus. You cannot do this to me. I have already spent that bonus money in advance. That is your fundamental problem, Andre, I replied smoothly, folding my arms across my chest. You always spend money before you actually earn it. You live entirely on credit and false appearances. But let me clarify something for you regarding your precious corporate merger. It was never a merger. It was a hostile takeover. I watched his arrogant facade shatter into a million tiny pieces. I wanted him to feel the exact same level of helplessness that I felt when he abandoned me and Trey 3 years ago. My board of directors initiated the acquisition of your firm because your leadership drove it straight into the ground, I explained with cold, methodical precision. Your department has been bleeding money for 2 years. You have lost major clients because you are lazy and incompetent. You thought Vanguard Holdings was coming in to save your career and elevate your status. In reality, I bought your entire firm just so I could personally dismantle it piece by piece. Mama Ruby found her voice again, though it lacked any of its former venom. She sounded small and desperately afraid. Nia, please, she begged, raising a shaking hand. We are family. You cannot destroy your own family. Andre is the father of your child. You have to show him some Christian mercy. You did not show me any Christian mercy when you forced me to eat in the kitchen, Mama Ruby, I reminded her sharply. You did not show Trey any mercy when you let Vanessa drain his college fund. Family protects each other. You all chose to protect a fake image. Now you get to live with the devastating consequences of that choice. I turned my full attention back to Andre, who was sweating profusely and hyperventilating against the luxury vehicle. I want you to listen to me very carefully, Andre, I said, making sure my voice carried clearly across the parking lot. As of 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, the hostile takeover is officially complete. Your entire department is being fully liquidated. You do not have a job anymore. You do not have a corporate title. You are completely unemployed. Andre dropped to his knees, his expensive suit pants scraping against the rough asphalt. Nia, I beg you, he sobbed, the tears finally falling down his face. I have massive debts. I owe money to dangerous people. If you take away my job, I will lose absolutely everything. What about my severance package? My contract guarantees a massive severance package if I am terminated without cause. You are not being terminated without cause. I smiled, dropping the final crushing blow onto his pathetic life. During our corporate audit, my team discovered that you have been actively embezzling company funds to pay for Vanessa's luxury vacations. We handed that file over to the authorities. Your severance package has been entirely revoked for gross breach of contract and criminal financial misconduct. Andre buried his face in his hands, weeping openly in front of the entire graduating class and their families. He was completely ruined. Vanessa, having heard the news of their financial obliteration, scrambled up from the grass. She ran toward us, screaming about her $2 million mansion and massive mortgage payments she must now somehow make. By Tuesday morning, the dust from the high school parking lot had barely settled before an entirely new storm struck Atlanta. I was sitting at my custom mahogany desk on the top floor of the Vanguard Holdings headquarters, sipping my morning espresso and reviewing the finalized liquidation orders for Andre's department. My executive assistant, Chloe, knocked sharply on the heavy glass door before stepping into my office. She did not bring me the usual morning financial reports. Instead, she carried a sleek silver tablet, her eyes wide with a mixture of professional shock and sheer amusement. She placed the device directly in front of me and tapped the smooth screen to play a video. A parent at the graduation ceremony had kept their smartphone recording long after the valedictorian speech ended. They had followed the loud commotion outside and captured every single second of our parking lot confrontation in stunningly clear, high-definition video. The raw footage caught Sarah's racist microaggressions, Vanessa screaming hysterically while chasing her repossessed luxury car, and Mama Ruby brandishing her silver cane like a dangerous weapon. But most importantly, it captured my absolute dismantling of their fake empire. The shocking video had been posted to a prominent Atlanta community blog late Monday evening. By sunrise on Tuesday, it had completely taken over the internet. The footage was spreading like wildfire across social media platforms, local news feeds, and private corporate group chats. People were analyzing every single word. The online comment sections were absolutely brutal, completely tearing apart the arrogant facade my ex-husband had spent a long decade building. The immediate fallout was catastrophic for Andre. His prestigious corporate firm, already extremely nervous about their declining quarterly revenues, went into an absolute state of panic as the public relations nightmare unfolded in real time. The video explicitly highlighted my direct accusations of his gross financial misconduct and his impending corporate liquidation. The senior partners at his firm did not even wait for a formal internal investigation. They were terrified of the terrible optics and the massive potential legal liability of harboring an active embezzler. Before Andre could even put on his shoes that morning, his firm released a blistering public statement on their official website. They announced that they were severing all professional ties with him, effective immediately, citing a severe violation of their core corporate values. When Andre desperately tried to swipe into his office building to salvage his personal belongings, the heavy security guards informed him that his access badge had been permanently deactivated. He was forcefully locked out of the very building he used to constantly brag about. The devastating destruction did not stop at the corporate level. The viral video had aggressively penetrated the sacred, highly judgmental halls of Mama Ruby's prestigious megachurch. For years, she had ruthlessly ruled the congregation's elite auxiliary board through intense fear manipulation, intimidation, and strict moral policing. She constantly preached about Christian grace, traditional family values, and protecting the local community. Now, every single member of her massive congregation was watching high-definition footage of their beloved matriarch, threatening to financially ruin a hard-working single mother just to protect a scamming deadbeat son. The deep hypocrisy was undeniably glaring. The elegant church ladies who had always quietly feared Mama Ruby's explosive wrath finally had the perfect ammunition they needed to tear her down from her self-appointed throne. Her cell phone rang endlessly with angry calls from the senior pastor and leading board members demanding an immediate mandatory meeting to discuss her highly inappropriate behavior. They were actively preparing to strip her of her coveted leadership titles. Her pristine, untouchable reputation was shattered into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. She was rapidly becoming a total social outcast in the exact religious community she had dedicated her entire life to controlling and manipulating. Meanwhile, the heavy ticking clock on my 48-hour eviction notice was ringing loudly in Andre's ears. He had less than 24 hours left before the county sheriff arrived to physically remove him and Vanessa from the foreclosed $2 million mansion. The walls were rapidly closing in fast. He had no job, no severance package, no luxury car, and absolutely no respect left in the grand city of Atlanta. His fake wealth had completely evaporated overnight, leaving him drowning in the terrifying, inescapable reality of his own pathetic making. But narcissists exactly like Andre never truly accept defeat. They always foolishly believe they can smoothly talk their way out of a tight corner. Desperate and utterly humiliated, Andre decided to play his final, most guarded card. He still miraculously held a premium membership at the elite Atlanta Country Club, an extremely exclusive organization filled with incredibly wealthy, powerful investors. He strongly believed that if he could just secure a massive, temporary bridge loan from one of his old golfing buddies, he could pay off the mortgage arrears, stop the eviction process, and buy himself enough valuable time to carefully spin the viral video as a massive misunderstanding. He frantically scrolled through his phone contacts until he found the private number for Marcus Sterling, a billionaire real estate developer who frequently visited the club. Andre called him begging for an urgent lunch meeting to discuss a highly lucrative temporary investment opportunity. Miraculously, the wealthy investor agreed to meet him at the country club dining room precisely at noon. Andre put on his very last clean designer suit, desperately trying to project a strong aura of calm, unbothered success. He practiced his pathetic pitch in the tall hallway mirror, falsely convincing himself that he could still save his shattered financial empire with a simple handshake and a charming, confident smile. He hastily grabbed his empty leather briefcase and drove his cheap rental car toward the heavily guarded wrought iron gates of the country club, completely unaware that he was walking blindly into a devastating, carefully calculated trap that I had personally arranged for him just a few short hours before. While Andre was driving straight toward his absolute humiliation at the country club, I was already back at my desk in the Vanguard Holdings executive suite. The sweeping view of the Atlanta skyline from my corner office was usually a source of immense peace, but this afternoon the intercom on my desk buzzed with a highly irritating interruption. Chloe, my ever-efficient assistant, informed me that a frantic blonde woman was causing a massive scene in the ground floor lobby. The woman was demanding to see me, immediately screaming to the security guards that her life was in mortal danger. I knew exactly who it was. I instructed Chloe to send Vanessa up, instructing the security team to escort her directly to my private suite. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open. Vanessa practically stumbled into the room. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, impeccably groomed woman who had stolen my VIP seat at the graduation ceremony just a few short days ago. Her designer dress was deeply wrinkled and she was clutching an oversized leather tote bag against her chest, like a protective shield. She looked around my expansive, luxurious office with wide, envious eyes before finally locking her desperate gaze onto me. "Nia, thank God you agreed to see me," Vanessa gasped, completely abandoning all pretense of her former aristocratic superiority. She rushed toward my desk, her heels clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. "You have to help me. You have to protect me from him. Andre is a complete monster." I leaned back in my high-backed leather chair, steepling my fingers together. I did not offer her a seat. "You have a tremendous amount of nerve showing your face inside my corporate headquarters, Vanessa," I replied, my voice dangerously calm and measured. "What exactly could you possibly want from the bitter, jealous ex-wife you mocked in the high school parking lot?" Vanessa flinched at the brutal reminder of her own cruel words. She swallowed hard tears welling up in her eyes. It was a spectacular performance, but I was completely immune to her fake theatrical displays. "I was brainwashed," Vanessa cried out, leaning over my desk with a look of pure fabricated agony. "Andre manipulated my mind from the very beginning. He lied to me about his finances, his career, and his entire life. He told me you were insane and demanding. He forced me to act that way toward you at the graduation. I was completely terrified of him, Nia. You have to believe me. We are both victims of his horrible narcissistic abuse." "Do not ever compare yourself to me," I interrupted smoothly, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "I survived Andre by working double shifts and building an empire. You survived him by spending his stolen money on luxury handbags and first-class flights to Dubai. We are not the same." Vanessa recoiled, but her sheer desperation quickly overrode her wounded pride. She unzipped her heavy leather tote bag with trembling hands. She reached inside and pulled out a small metallic silver flash drive. She placed it carefully on the center of my pristine desk, pushing it slowly toward me like a highly valuable poker chip. "I know you want to completely destroy him," Vanessa whispered, her eyes darting around the room as if she expected Andre to suddenly appear from the shadows. "I know he embezzled money from his firm. He kept massive encrypted files on his home computer. I downloaded the entire primary ledger onto this flash drive before I left the mansion this morning." I looked down at the small piece of metal resting on my desk. I did not touch it. "And what exactly do you want in return for this stolen information, Vanessa?" Her fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, calculating greed that defined her entire miserable existence. "I want $100,000 in cash," she demanded, her voice suddenly firm and transactional. "I need money to start a new life far away from Atlanta. I also want full legal immunity. When you hand this evidence over to his corporate board and the authorities, you leave my name completely out of it. You pay me the cash, you take the flash drive, and you get to lock your horrible ex-husband in a federal prison forever." I stared at her, marveling at the absolute audacity of her blatant extortion attempt. "Let me make sure I fully understand your proposal," I said, leaning forward and folding my hands over the desk. "You are officially offering to sell me stolen corporate financial records in exchange for $100,000 in untraceable cash, while simultaneously demanding a guarantee that I conceal your active involvement in a major federal crime." "It is a completely fair trade," Vanessa insisted, nodding her head vigorously. "You are a billionaire. $100,000 is literally nothing to you. This flash drive is the definitive silver bullet that will put Andre behind bars. You need this." I let out a soft, echoing laugh. "Vanessa, you are incredibly predictable. Did you honestly think I executed a hostile takeover of Andre's entire firm without already conducting a rigorous forensic financial audit?" Her eyes widened in sudden, terrifying realization. "I do not need your little flash drive," I explained methodically. "My team of elite corporate auditors uncovered Andre's sloppy embezzlement scheme 3 weeks ago. We already possess every single forged invoice and a legal wire transfer. We know exactly how much money he stole." I reached across my desk and calmly pressed the small silver intercom button. You may send them in now, Chloe. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open immediately. Two uniformed police officers stepped into the room accompanied by a stern detective in a sharp gray suit. Vanessa Williams, the detective asked, holding up a gleaming pair of silver handcuffs. You are under arrest for attempted extortion and possession of stolen corporate data. Vanessa screamed. The sound of Vanessa's screaming echoed down the executive hallway as the police officers escorted her toward the freight elevator. I did not watch her leave. I simply instructed my assistant to sanitize the guest chair and went back to reviewing my quarterly reports. Andre had lost his career, his fake wealth, and his treacherous new wife all in the span of 48 hours. But there was still one vital pillar of his toxic empire left standing, and she was currently preparing to host the most important social event of her entire life. Mama Ruby was not a woman who surrendered easily. Despite the viral video completely destroying her pristine reputation across Atlanta, she genuinely believed she could salvage her aristocratic image through sheer stubbornness and religious theater. That Saturday evening, she hosted her highly anticipated annual charity gala at the most prominent megachurch in the city. The massive sanctuary had been transformed into an extravagant banquet hall filled with local politicians, wealthy business owners, and the elite church auxiliary board. Mama Ruby stood at the center of the grand stage draped in a sparkling emerald gown gripping the crystal podium as if her very life depended on it. She was delivering a passionate, tear-filled speech about divine intervention and community resilience. The Lord has truly blessed our congregation this week, Mama Ruby proclaimed, her booming voice echoing through the massive state-of-the-art sound system. Despite the wicked, unfounded rumors spread by jealous individuals trying to tear this family down, our faith remains absolutely unshaken. In fact, just yesterday, our church received a miraculous $2 million donation from a highly generous, anonymous corporate benefactor. That money has fully funded our new community center, proving that righteousness always prevails over petty, classless attacks. Ja. The congregation erupted into polite, relieved applause. They desperately wanted to believe her narrative. They wanted the comfortable, familiar illusion of Mama Ruby's holy leadership. But before the applause could fully die down, the heavy, solid oak double doors at the very back of the sanctuary swung open with a resounding crash. I walked down the center aisle. I was not wearing my catering uniform. I was wearing a sharply tailored midnight black designer suit, and my heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The entire congregation fell dead silent. Mama Ruby froze at the podium, her eyes widening in absolute horror as I marched straight toward the brightly lit stage. Several church ushers stepped forward to block my path, but I did not even break my confident stride. You can tell your security team to stand down, Mama Ruby. I projected my voice clearly, climbing the short, carpeted steps onto the stage. Unless, of course, you want them to physically remove the anonymous corporate benefactor who just saved your entire church from total bankruptcy. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of wealthy guests seated at the circular banquet tables. Mama Ruby's jaw dropped, her emerald gown suddenly looking ridiculous against her pale, terrified complexion. You... Mama Ruby choked out, gripping the microphone stand with trembling hands. You are the anonymous donor from Vanguard Holdings. I am the sole owner of Vanguard Holdings, I corrected her smoothly, stepping up to the podium and firmly taking the microphone right out of her rigid grasp. I donated that $2 million to the community center because the hardworking people of this neighborhood actually deserve a safe place for their children. But more importantly, I donated that money so I could legally demand a full independent forensic audit of this church's private financial accounts. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces. I raised my free hand and signaled to the audiovisual technician sitting in the upper balcony booth. I had paid him a very generous consulting fee earlier that afternoon. Instantly, the massive high-definition projector screens behind the stage flared to bright life. Instead of the classic church logo, the screens displayed a series of highly detailed, highlighted bank statements and internal accounting ledgers. For the past 3 years, Mama Ruby has stood on this exact stage and begged all of you to dig deeper into your pockets. I announced, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. She told you the church was struggling to pay for basic maintenance. She demanded a second offering every single Sunday. But the church was not struggling. The church was being actively robbed by her own flesh and blood. I pointed to the massive screens behind me. Look at the highlighted transfers. Every single month for 36 months, massive sums of cash were quietly siphoned directly out of the church offering fund. That money was deposited into a hidden offshore shell account. The congregation began to shout in outrage. Senior board members stood up from their decorated tables, pointing angrily at the damning evidence displayed high above us. Andre used your hard-earned offering money to pay for Vanessa's diamond tennis bracelets, luxury vacations to Dubai, and his expensive country club dues. I revealed, turning to look directly at the ruined matriarch trembling beside me. And the absolute worst part is that Mama Ruby discovered his massive theft 14 months ago. Her official signature is right there on the bottom of the internal audit cover-up. She actively hid her son's federal crimes from the entire congregation just to protect her precious social status. You preached about honesty and virtue every single weekend, but you allowed your own community to suffer so your golden child could pretend to be a successful corporate executive. You sacrificed the very people who trusted you the most, all for the sake of a fake glittering image that was destined to completely fall apart. The police already have these exact documents safely secured in their primary evidence locker, Mama Ruby. They are actively preparing to issue a formal arrest warrant for both you and your son. Your fake hypocritical reign over this city is now permanently finished for good. The massive sanctuary erupted into utter chaos as I dropped the microphone onto the crystal podium and walked away from the stage. I did not look back to watch the police officers walk through the double doors to escort Mama Ruby and Andre out of the building. By Tuesday morning, the spectacular fallout from the gala had saturated the Atlanta news cycle. The spectacular footage of Mama Ruby's absolute destruction at the church gala did not just saturate the local news cycle. It functioned as the final devastating nail in the coffin for the Williams family's fake aristocratic legacy. By Monday morning, the fallout had violently spread through the affluent gated neighborhoods of Buckhead. At the elite Atlanta country club where Marcus and Sarah had spent decades looking down their noses at everyone else, they suddenly became the ultimate social pariahs. Wealthy socialites and powerful investors aggressively distanced themselves from the entire family. Sarah's phone, which usually buzzed endlessly with invitations to exclusive garden parties and charity luncheons, went dead silent. When she desperately tried to walk into her favorite upscale boutique, the manager politely but firmly asked her to leave, citing unpaid luxury accounts. Marcus spent his entire Monday locked in his home office, frantically calling his financial brokers, only to discover that Vanguard Holdings had officially blacklisted his name across every major banking institution in the state. No one would lend them a single dime. They were radioactive. Marcus and Sarah, already drowning in their own hidden insurmountable debts, realized with terrifying clarity that the complete obliteration of Andre and Mama Ruby meant there was absolutely no one left to shield them from their impending bankruptcy. The anonymous angel investor they had constantly mocked and looked down upon was literally the only person in the entire state of Georgia with the capital and the power to save them. They had spent 18 long years treating her like dirt on the bottom of their designer shoes. Now, driven by sheer suffocating panic and the looming terrifying threat of their own eviction, they were forced to swallow whatever microscopic shred of pride they had left. The drive to the Vanguard Holdings headquarters on Tuesday morning was the most agonizing journey of their lives. When they stepped out of their aging car and looked up at the towering 50-story glass skyscraper that I owned outright, the sheer scale of my wealth finally crushed them. They walked into the sprawling, marble-floored lobby not as high society royalty but as desperate beggars. My corporate office at Vanguard Holdings felt like a quiet, elevated fortress high above the absolute wreckage I had left behind in the city streets below. Chloe, my executive assistant, sounded unusually hesitant. She informed me that Marcus and Sarah were standing in the ground floor lobby. They were not causing a scene or demanding entry. Instead, Chloe noted that they were quietly begging the security desk for just 5 minutes of my time. I instructed Chloe to send them up. The heavy glass doors of my executive suite swung open slowly, revealing a sight that almost defied belief. Marcus and Sarah looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant, impeccably groomed couple who had stood in the high school parking lot just a week ago. Marcus wore a wrinkled suit. Sarah, stripped of diamonds, wore plain slacks and a simple blouse. Her perfectly bronzed face was pale drawn and completely devoid of her usual haughty superiority. They walked toward my mahogany desk with slow, incredibly hesitant steps, looking like two terrified children called into the principal's office. I did not offer them a seat. I simply closed my laptop and folded my hands on the desk, waiting for them to speak. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously around my massive office before finally meeting my gaze. "Nia, we have absolutely nowhere else to go." Marcus started, his voice trembling with sheer desperation. "Andre completely lied to us about his corporate merger. He convinced me to invest the last $50,000 we had into his company stock, promising a massive return. When Vanguard Holdings liquidated his department, our investment evaporated instantly. We are entirely bankrupt. The bank is foreclosing on the Buckhead estate again, and this time, we have no anonymous angel investor to save us. We are losing the house, the cars, and the country club memberships. We have absolutely nothing left. And why exactly are you bringing your financial failures to my office, Marcus?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any sympathy. "You chose to trust a man who has been living a fabricated lie for a decade." Marcus stepped closer, his hands visibly shaking at his sides. "I am begging you for a job, Nia. A loan. An entry-level position in your property management division. Anything. I have a degree in finance. I can work hard. We just need a lifeline to survive this nightmare." I shifted my gaze away from Marcus and locked eyes directly with his wife. Sarah flinched under my intense scrutiny, looking down at her scuffed shoes. The silence stretched out heavy and suffocating until the unbearable pressure finally forced her to speak. "I am sorry," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking as genuine tears of profound humiliation welled up in her eyes. "I am so incredibly sorry for the way I spoke to you at the graduation, Nia. I was wrong. I was stressed about our finances, and I took it out on you. Please forgive me." I let out a slow, deliberate breath. I stood up from my leather chair and walked around my desk, stopping just a few feet away from the woman who had spent 18 years treating me like an unwanted stray dog. "You are not sorry for what you said, Sarah," I replied, my voice ringing with cold, absolute precision. "You are only sorry that the woman you insulted turned out to hold the keys to your survival. You want to blame your cruel words on financial stress, but that is a pathetic excuse. I experienced crippling financial stress for 18 years while working double shifts to feed my son, but I never once degraded another human being to make myself feel better." Sarah closed her eyes, tears spilling rapidly down her pale cheeks. "Let us be entirely honest about what happened in that parking lot." I continued, breaking down her toxic psychology with surgical accuracy. "You used the word ghetto because you wanted to weaponize your white privilege against a black single mother. You used your old money status as a heavy club to beat me down so you could maintain the fragile illusion of your own superiority. You knew your husband was drowning in federal tax liens. You knew your generational wealth was a complete lie. But instead of facing your own terrifying reality, you decided to punch down. You desperately needed me to be the classless trash at the bottom of the social ladder so you could pretend you still belonged at the very top." Marcus reached out to hold his weeping wife, but Sarah just stood there, completely paralyzed by the devastating truth of my words. She had built her entire identity on false superiority, and I had just stripped it away completely. "I spent a decade letting you microaggress me at family dinners," I told her, stepping back toward my desk. "I let you make snide comments about my catering uniform because I foolishly believed keeping the peace was better for my son. But I am not keeping the peace anymore. I am enforcing reality." I looked at Marcus, whose eyes were still filled with pathetic, desperate hope. "I do not hire people who invest blindly based on arrogant ego," I stated firmly, delivering my final, crushing decision. "And I certainly do not employ people who lack basic human integrity." Vanguard Holdings requires executives who can build real value, not parasites who survive by leeching off the hard work of others. I will not give you a job, Marcus. I will not give you a bridge loan. I will not save your precious Buckhead estate today. I had barely finished watching Marcus and Sarah walk out of my office in complete defeat when my legal team notified me of Andre's final desperate move. Federal agents from the Securities and Exchange Commission had officially raided his liquidated office that very morning. They seized his remaining physical assets and completely froze his hidden bank accounts. Facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison for massive corporate fraud, Andre panicked. Like a cornered rat, he hired a sleazy, desperate attorney who worked on contingency to file a massive Hail Mary lawsuit against me. The absurd legal filing claimed that Vanguard Holdings was a hidden marital asset. Andre was aggressively arguing that he was legally entitled to exactly half of my billion-dollar real estate empire, because I had supposedly started building the catering funds before our divorce was officially finalized. 3 days later, we met in a sterile, brightly lit conference room at my elite corporate law firm in downtown Atlanta. I sat comfortably at the long glass table flanked by my 3 top-tier attorneys. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Andre strolled into the room with an absolutely sickening level of arrogance. He was wearing a cheap off-the-rack suit, but he walked with the exaggerated swagger of a man who firmly believed he had just found a multi-million-dollar loophole. Beside him walked his bargain basement lawyer, a sweaty, nervous man clutching a battered leather briefcase. Andre actually had the sheer audacity to flash me a smug, victorious smile as he dropped into the leather chair directly across from me. He honestly thought he was about to extort me for hundreds of millions of dollars. Andre leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest like a triumphant king. "You really thought you could hide a massive corporate empire from me during our divorce proceedings, Nia?" Andre sneered, his voice dripping with venomous greed. "You built the initial capital for Vanguard Holdings while we were still legally married. You used marital funds from your catering business to buy those first few distressed properties. My legal team has thoroughly reviewed the timeline. The state of Georgia is going to award me exactly 50% of your entire company. You can save yourself a very lengthy, humiliating public trial by simply writing me a massive settlement check today. I will take $50 million in untraceable cash, and I will kindly drop the entire lawsuit." I did not blink. I did not show a single ounce of emotion. I just stared at the pathetic, delusional man sitting across from me. I slowly turned my head and nodded to my lead corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling was a ruthless, impeccably dressed legal shark who had absolutely no patience for amateur extortion attempts. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue with Andre's ridiculous demands. Mr. Sterling simply reached into his pristine leather folio and pulled out a single, neatly folded document. "Mr. Davis," my attorney said, addressing Andre's sweating lawyer with absolute chilling professionalism. "Before you proceed with this entirely frivolous and legally baseless lawsuit, I strongly suggest you review this specific document with your client. I have highlighted the relevant clause on the second page for your convenience." Mr. Sterling slid the thick paper smoothly across the glass conference table. Andre scoffed, rolling his eyes as his lawyer nervously picked up the document. "This is completely irrelevant," Andre boasted loudly, slapping his hand on the table. "No piece of paper is going to override my legal right to marital assets. I was her husband. I am entitled to half of everything she owns." "That is a post-nuptial separation agreement, Andre." I finally spoke, my voice ringing with cold, absolute clarity. "Do you remember signing that highly specific document exactly 3 years ago?" Andre frowned, his arrogant posture faltering for just a fraction of a second. His lawyer began to read the highlighted section, and the color immediately drained from the man's sweaty face. "3 years ago, you were absolutely desperate to run away to Paris with Vanessa." I reminded him methodically, watching his eyes widen in sudden, terrifying realization. "You wanted to completely abandon your responsibilities to our son. You refused to pay a single dime of child support. When my lawyer sent you that separation agreement, you were in such a frantic rush to leave us behind that you did not even bother to read the fine print. You just wanted out of the marriage immediately." Mr. Sterling leaned forward, pressing his hands flat against the glass table. "Let me read the exact terms for the record," my attorney stated sharply. "By signing this binding agreement, Andre Williams formally relinquishes any and all rights, claims, or interests in Nia Carter's past, present, and future financial assets, business ventures, and corporate holdings. In exchange for zero future child support obligations, Mr. Williams agrees that all businesses established by Ms. Carter, regardless of their inception date, remain her sole and exclusive property in perpetuity." The sterile conference room fell completely silent. Andre stopped breathing entirely. He stared at the piece of paper in his lawyer's trembling hands. The devastating reality of his own selfish, neglectful actions had just obliterated his final desperate chance at survival. He had literally signed away his legal rights to a billion-dollar empire just so he could avoid paying even a few $100s a month to feed his own teenage son. "This is ironclad," Andre's lawyer whispered, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. The lawyer quickly realized that without a valid claim to my assets, Andre was completely broke. There would be no massive settlement. There would be no multi-million-dollar financial payout. More importantly, there would be no money to pay the exorbitant legal fees. "Wait, we can fight this," Andre stammered, grabbing his lawyer's arm frantically. "We can tell the judge I was under severe emotional duress." Andre's lawyer violently yanked his arm away from his ruined client. The sweaty attorney did not say a single word. He hastily shoved the post-nuptial agreement back across the glass table. He frantically grabbed his battered leather briefcase, snapped the brass lock shut, and stood up from his chair. "Hey, where are you going?" Andre shouted, genuine panic ripping through his voice. "We have a deposition to finish. You work for me." "I work for people who can actually pay me," the lawyer snapped back, not even looking at Andre. The attorney quickly turned on his heel, pushed open the heavy wooden door, and walked swiftly out of the conference room, completely abandoning Andre on the very spot. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, leaving Andre sitting in absolute suffocating silence. He stared blankly at the empty chair where his bargain basement attorney had been sitting just seconds ago. I did not offer him a single parting word. I simply stood up, smoothed the lapels of my tailored suit, and walked out of the conference room with Mr. Sterling right beside me. We left my ex-husband completely alone with the crushing realization that he had legally engineered his own absolute financial ruin. Andre stumbled out of the downtown legal building in a total daze. The sweltering Atlanta heat hit him, but he shivered violently. He had no lawyer, no corporate job, no leverage, and absolutely no money. His grand delusional plan to extort me for $50 million had spectacularly backfired, leaving him exposed to impending federal charges. Desperate for any shred of comfort, he climbed into his cheap rental car and sped toward the foreclosed Buckhead mansion. He foolishly believed that Vanessa would still be waiting for him. He convinced himself that his beautiful, loyal wife would help him formulate a brand new survival strategy. When Andre pulled into the sprawling, circular driveway, he immediately noticed something was terribly wrong. The massive custom mahogany front doors were wide open, swaying slightly in the afternoon breeze. "Vanessa?" Andre called out, his voice cracking as he sprinted up the marble steps and rushed into the grand foyer. Only his own frantic voice echoed back to him. The $2 million mansion was completely stripped bare. The expensive imported Italian leather sofas in the living room were gone. The crystal chandeliers had been hastily unscrewed from the ceiling, leaving bare wires hanging dangerously overhead. The massive flat-screen televisions, the imported Persian rugs, and every single piece of valuable artwork had completely vanished. Andre sprinted up the sweeping curved staircase, his breathing turning into ragged, panicked gasps. He burst into the master suite. The massive California king bed frame was entirely dismantled. He rushed straight into Vanessa's expansive custom-built walk-in closet. It was completely empty. Every single designer dress, every pair of red-bottom shoes, and all of her expensive Hermes handbags had been thoroughly cleared out. The only things left in the massive space were a few of Andre's cheap, off-the-rack suits haphazardly thrown onto the hardwood floor like actual garbage. A terrifying thought suddenly struck him. He abandoned the empty closet and sprinted down the hallway toward his private mahogany study. Behind a false bookshelf, Andre kept a hidden floor safe. Inside that safe was a ledger containing the routing numbers to a highly secretive encrypted offshore bank account. It held exactly $50,000. It was his absolute last resort, a hidden emergency fund he had specifically concealed from the bankruptcy courts and the federal investigators. He shoved the heavy bookshelf aside and dropped to his hands and knees. The heavy steel door of the floor safe was already hanging wide open. Andre shoved his hands inside the dark metal box, frantically searching for the leather ledger. It was completely empty. The $50,000, his last remaining lifeline in the entire world, was entirely gone. However, resting right in the center of the cold steel floor was a single piece of heavy, expensive cardstock. Andre picked up the crisp white paper with violently shaking hands. It was a handwritten note penned in Vanessa's elegant, looping cursive. "Andre," the note began, "I listened to everything Nia said in that parking lot, and I realized you are completely useless. I refuse to go down with a sinking ship. I found the combination to your little floor safe hidden in your desk drawer. I successfully wired the remaining $50,000 into my private overseas account. Do not bother trying to track me down. As you once told Nia when you walked out on her 3 years ago, family life is simply stifling my potential. I need to be with someone who actually understands my true worth. You are a broke, pathetic liar. Goodbye." She had used his exact cruel words against him. The very same heartless justification he had proudly used when he abandoned his teenage son and his hard-working wife was now the exact weapon his gold-digging new bride used to destroy his final shred of hope. Vanessa had not just abandoned him. She had systematically robbed him blind, completely stripping the mansion of anything valuable to pawn for quick cash before fleeing the city forever. Andre collapsed backward, sitting heavily on the bare hardwood floor of his empty study. He clutched the cruel, mocking letter in his sweaty hands, letting out a guttural, agonizing sob. He had betrayed the only woman who had ever truly loved and supported him. He had traded a loyal, brilliant wife for a superficial parasite who ruthlessly drained him of every single penny before leaving him to face federal prison entirely alone. As Andre sat weeping in the empty, echoing house, a loud, authoritative pounding suddenly erupted at the front entrance. The heavy, rhythmic knocking vibrated through the hollow mansion, accompanied by the stern, unmistakable sound of a police radio crackling in the foyer. The 48-hour eviction notice I had slapped against his chest in the high school parking lot had officially hit zero. "Fulton County Sheriff's Department," a deep, booming voice shouted from the bottom of the grand staircase. "This property is now legally owned by Vanguard Holdings. Anyone inside the premises must exit the building immediately. You have exactly 2 minutes to vacate before you are placed under arrest for criminal trespassing." Andre remained frozen on the floor, his vision blurring with hot, desperate tears. He looked around the empty room, realizing he had absolutely nothing left to pack. The armed deputies were already marching up the wooden stairs, their heavy boots announcing the final, absolute end of his fake, aristocratic empire. He truly had absolutely nowhere left to hide today. The heavy boots of the Fulton County Sheriff deputies echoed loudly against the bare hardwood floors as they marched directly into the empty master suite. They did not care about Andre and his expensive tailored suit. They were completely unmoved by his frantic, tearful pleas for just one more week to figure out his finances. The lead deputy grabbed Andre firmly by the upper arm and physically marched him down his own sweeping, curved staircase. They did not allow him to grab a suitcase or pack a proper bag. A junior officer grabbed 2 black plastic garbage bags from the kitchen and hastily stuffed them with the few cheap suits Vanessa had thrown onto the closet floor. That was all Andre was allowed to take. The deputies pushed Andre out the front door and forced him to stand on the hot concrete curb at the end of the sprawling, circular driveway. He watched in absolute humiliating horror as my private Vanguard Holdings security team immediately stepped up to the massive mahogany doors. They wore crisp black uniforms with my corporate logo stitched in bright gold thread on their shoulders. The lead security officer pulled out a heavy drill and began changing the intricate locks on the $2 million mansion. Andre stood on the sidewalk clutching two trash bags full of wrinkled clothes, looking like a discarded vagrant in the middle of the most exclusive, wealthy neighborhood in the entire city of Atlanta. His wealthy neighbors drove past in their luxury vehicles, slowing down to stare through their tinted windows at the spectacular, embarrassing downfall of a man who used to brag about his untouchable corporate success at their elite country club. While Andre was being thrown onto the street like common garbage, a nearly identical scene was violently unfolding across town. Mama Ruby had spent the entire morning frantically calling every single member of her mega-church congregation, begging them for a temporary loan to save her shattered reputation. Every single person declined her calls or sent her straight to voicemail. The church auxiliary board had officially voted to strip her of all her titles at sunrise. She was sitting in her lavish high-rise luxury condo in downtown Atlanta, furiously planning her ultimate revenge against me. She had absolutely no idea that her own eviction clock had also struck zero. I had not just purchased the deed to Andre and Vanessa's foreclosed mansion. Months ago, I quietly instructed my elite financial team to track down the massive debt portfolio for the specific luxury condominium building where Mama Ruby lived. I bought the building's entire commercial mortgage using a subsidiary branch of Vanguard Holdings. As the primary landlord, I ordered my property management team to enforce a strict zero-tolerance policy for any late rent payments. Mama Ruby had been using stolen church offering funds to pay for her extravagant penthouse suite for 3 years. When I exposed her massive fraud at the charity gala and the police froze her remaining bank accounts, her scheduled rent payment bounced completely. The property manager marched up to the penthouse floor accompanied by 3 armed security guards. They pounded on Mama Ruby's pristine white door and handed her an immediate notice of termination. She screamed, threatened to call the police, and brandished her silver cane at the property manager. The guards were entirely unfazed. They gave the ruined matriarch exactly 1 hour to pack her personal belongings into a few cardboard boxes. She was physically escorted into the freight elevator, crying out about her powerful social status and demanding Christian mercy from the very people she had constantly demeaned. Mama Ruby was permanently exiled from the wealthy epicenter of Atlanta society. Because her bank accounts were frozen by federal investigators and her reputation was entirely destroyed, she could not secure a lease anywhere in the affluent metropolitan area. She was forced to hire a cheap moving van with the last few dollars hidden in her purse. The movers drove her far away to a tiny dilapidated one-bedroom apartment on the absolute farthest, most dangerous outskirts of the city. The peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, and stained carpets were a brutal, devastating downgrade from her glittering emerald gowns and crystal podiums. She was finally forced to live in the exact same impoverished conditions she had spent her entire life mocking and judging others for enduring. Back in the wealthy suburbs, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Andre. He was sweating heavily in his ruined suit, standing next to his plastic garbage bags. His phone was completely dead. He had no access to his frozen bank accounts. The private recovery agents had towed his rental car away because the credit card he used to secure the deposit had been officially flagged for massive fraud. He had no friends left at his former corporate firm. His brother Marcus and his sister-in-law Sarah had completely blocked his phone number after I refused to give them a financial bridge loan. His young gold-digging wife had robbed his hidden floor safe and fled the state entirely. Andre stared at the massive locked gates of the beautiful estate he used to proudly call his own. The heavy reality of his impending federal arrest warrant loomed over his head like a dark, suffocating cloud. The Securities and Exchange Commission was actively preparing to indict him for stealing millions of dollars. He was going to spend the next 10 to 15 years in a federal prison cell. He was entirely broken, totally homeless, and completely abandoned by everyone who had ever claimed to respect him. As the hot Georgia wind blew a piece of trash across his expensive Italian leather shoes, Andre came to a sudden, terrifying realization. He had alienated his entire world. He had literally only one single person left to turn to for survival. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and decided he would beg me to save his life. As the hot Georgia wind blew a piece of trash across his expensive Italian leather shoes, Andre came to a sudden, terrifying realization. He had alienated his entire world. He had literally only one single person left to turn to for survival. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone with violently shaking hands, and decided he would beg me to save his life. He scrolled frantically through his contacts, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead despite the sweltering heat. He dialed my private executive number, pressing the phone hard against his ear, praying to a god he had ignored for years that I would answer. The line rang endlessly, each tone amplifying the crushing silence of the empty mansion behind him. Finally, there was a sharp click. Vanguard Holdings Office of the Chief Executive. Chloe's crisp, highly professional voice answered through the receiver. Chloe, please, it is Andre Williams. He pleaded, his voice cracking with unfiltered desperation, abandoning any pretense of his former arrogance. I need to speak with Nia immediately. Please, you have to understand it is a matter of life and death. I have lost everything. You have to put her on the line right now. There was a brief pause on the other end. When Chloe spoke again, her tone dripped with icy, rehearsed indifference that cut straight to his core. I am sorry, sir. Ms. Carter is currently busy managing her billion-dollar real estate portfolio. She left very specific instructions regarding your calls. She stated that she does not take unsolicited demands from unemployed homeless trespassers. She also suggested you use your remaining phone battery to contact a public defender. Do not call this executive line again. The line went dead with a harsh beep. Andre stared at his dark phone screen, his mouth hanging open. The terrifying reality of his absolute isolation closed in around him like a physical vice. I wouldn't even grant him the dignity of hearing my voice. If I wouldn't take his calls, he had to force me to see him. He had to throw himself at my mercy in person to look into my eyes and beg. With no car, no money for a taxi, and his credit cards completely frozen by federal investigators, Andre had no choice. He picked up his 2 plastic garbage bags and began the long, humiliating walk toward the downtown business district. The oppressive afternoon heat quickly gave way to a sudden violent shift in the weather. The sky above Atlanta bruised a deep, angry purple. The temperature plummeted and the wind began to howl through the city streets. Driven only by the pathetic delusion that he could still somehow manipulate my heart with his tears, Andre dragged his exhausted body mile after mile, his ruined Italian leather shoes blistering his feet with every painful step, walking blindly into the heart of the storm. Thick, heavy storm clouds rolled over the towering Atlanta skyscrapers, unleashing a relentless wall of freezing rain. Andre stood shivering violently on the polished concrete plaza directly outside the grand glass entrance of Vanguard Holdings headquarters. His expensive custom-tailored suit, once his absolute proudest possession, was completely soaked through. The fine Italian fabric clung heavily to his trembling frame, ruined beyond repair by the harsh weather and his own terrifying panic. He held 2 black plastic garbage bags containing his remaining possessions close to his chest, looking exactly like the discarded broken man he had ultimately become. He waited in the freezing storm for nearly 3 long, grueling hours. He watched wealthy corporate executives walk out of the revolving doors protected by large umbrellas. Every time the heavy glass doors spun, Andre nervously wiped the cold rain from his bloodshot eyes, desperately hoping to see my face. His mind raced frantically, rehearsing the pathetic script he planned to use to save his life. He genuinely believed that because I had loved him deeply for 18 long years, I would harbor some secret weakness for him. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, the grand revolving doors began to turn. I finally walked out of the massive corporate lobby. I was flanked immediately by 4 heavily armed private security guards. One guard smoothly opened a massive black golf umbrella, holding it high over my head to shield me from the pouring rain. I wore a pristine, heavy cream-colored designer trench coat. My personal driver had already pulled my sleek black SUV right up to the curb. Andre dropped his 2 garbage bags onto the flooded concrete. He stumbled forward, stepping out from the dark shadows. My personal security detail reacted instantly. 2 guards stepped directly in front of me, placing their hands firmly on their holstered weapons, creating an impenetrable human wall between me and the drenched, erratic man rushing toward us. "Nia, please wait!" Andre screamed, his voice cracking violently over the loud roar of the pouring rain. He held his hands up in the air, signaling that he was unarmed. Please, Nia. I just need 5 minutes. I have nowhere else to go. Please tell them to let me speak to you. I immediately stopped walking. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not step backward. I simply raised my right hand, giving my security guards a silent signal to hold their current positions, but allow him to speak. The guards relaxed their aggressive stances slightly, but they did not step aside. The man who had told me to sit in the back of our son's graduation suddenly collapsed entirely. His knees hit the flooded pavement with a sickening thud. He fell straight into a freezing puddle, soaking his pants completely. He looked up at me from the ground, the heavy rain washing away the last shreds of his arrogant dignity. I am so incredibly sorry, Nia. Andre sobbed, his chest heaving as he let out a loud, pathetic wail. The hot tears streamed rapidly down his face. I was completely out of my mind. I was entirely brainwashed. You have to believe me. Vanessa manipulated me into believing I needed a flashier wife to succeed. She poisoned my brain. And my mother constantly pressured me to maintain that ridiculous aristocratic image. Mama Ruby forced me to push you away because she was terrified of your fierce independence. I was just a weak pawn in their toxic games. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, ignoring the sharp concrete scraping against his skin. He desperately reached out, trying to grab the hem of my trench coat, but my security guard swiftly kicked his hand away. Andre recoiled, but he did not stop his frantic pleading. They took absolutely everything from me, Nia, Andre cried out, his voice echoing tragically across the empty plaza. Vanessa robbed my hidden safe and abandoned me to face federal prison alone. The bank took the mansion. My firm fired me. I have no money, no shelter, and no friends. I am completely broken. But seeing you standing here right now, I finally realize the massive, unforgivable mistake I made. You were always the only one who genuinely cared about me. Please, Nia, I am begging you for your mercy. Andre wept, his entire body shaking violently in the storm. I know I hurt you. I know I walked out on Trey. But we built a beautiful life together for 18 years. Think about our son. Think about the history we share. Please, I am asking you to remember the deep, profound love we used to share. You have billions of dollars. Just give me a small fraction of what you have so I can hire a decent defense lawyer. Help me pay off the fraud charges. Save my life, Nia. The rain continued to fall, soaking Andre to the bone while I stood perfectly dry under the massive umbrella. He looked up at my face, desperately searching my eyes for any flicker of hesitation. He was hunting for the compassionate, forgiving woman who used to work double shifts just to make sure he had a hot meal. He expected to see a small glimmer of pity. He expected to see residual anger. He even expected to see a deep sense of joyful vindication. He found absolutely none of those comforting things. I stared down at the pathetic, weeping man kneeling in the freezing puddles at my feet. My expression did not change at all. My resting heart rate did not elevate. I did not feel a single ounce of sadness for his catastrophic downfall. I did not feel any lingering rage for the years of emotional abuse he inflicted upon me. I did not even feel a sense of triumphant, sweet joy. I looked at the father of my child, the man who had destroyed our family for a superficial image, and I felt nothing but absolute freezing indifference. I looked down at the man who had completely destroyed our family for a superficial image. He was kneeling in a puddle of freezing rain, waiting for me to save him from the devastating consequences of his own terrible choices. He expected my heart to soften because he was finally crying. He thought his tears would somehow erase the 18 years I spent working double shifts while he played the role of a wealthy corporate bachelor. You want me to remember the profound love we used to share? I said, my voice cutting through the loud roar of the storm like a freshly sharpened blade. You want me to think about our son. But Andre, you never thought about Trey when you drained his college fund to buy Vanessa diamond bracelets. You never thought about the love we shared when you signed a post-nuptial agreement just to avoid paying a few $100s a month in child support. You abandoned your only child because you felt that raising him was stifling your massive potential. Andre let out a loud, pathetic sob, burying his wet face in his shaking hands. I was wrong, Nia. I was so incredibly wrong. You are not sorry for what you did to us, I replied methodically, refusing to raise my voice. You are only sorry that you got caught. You are only crying right now because you lost your fake status, your luxury cars, and your elite country club memberships. You do not miss me, Andre. You just desperately miss having a loyal, hard-working woman to fund your arrogant lifestyle. You are a textbook narcissist mourning the tragic death of your own fragile ego. Andre shook his head wildly, wiping the freezing rain from his bloodshot eyes. No, Nia, please. I am a changed man. I see everything so clearly now. I will do whatever it takes to earn your forgiveness. I will work for you. I will scrub the floors of your office building. Just give me one final chance to prove my loyalty. I let out a short, hollow laugh that held absolutely no warmth or pity. You had 18 years of second chances, Andre. I catered miserable corporate events until my feet bled just so you could study in peace. I wore thrift store clothes so you could afford custom-tailored suits. I built my entire real estate empire in complete silence because I knew the moment I became more successful than you, your fragile masculine pride would completely shatter. And I was right. I took a slow, deliberate step closer to him, letting the heavy shadow of my large umbrella fall over his kneeling, trembling body. He looked up at me with pathetic, desperate hope. Do you remember the high school graduation ceremony last week? I asked softly, watching his pale face twist in sudden, agonizing shame. Do you remember when you grabbed my arm and forcefully told me to go sit in the general admission bleachers? You told me I was pathetic. You called me ghetto. You ordered me to stand in the very back of the auditorium so I would not embarrass your elegant, sophisticated new wife in front of the local press. Andre squeezed his eyes tightly shut completely, unable to bear the heavy weight of his own cruel words returning to haunt him. You thought you were punishing me by sending me to the shadows. I continued my words, striking him like physical blows. You told me to sit in the back. But the funny thing about the back of the room is that you see absolutely everything perfectly clearly. You get to watch the entire performance from a distance. You see who is fake, and you see who is real. I stood by those exit doors, and I watched you pretend to be a successful, wealthy father. I watched Vanessa pretend to be a loving stepmother. And I watched my brilliant 18-year-old son see straight through your disgusting lies. You did not banish me to the back of the room, Andre. You simply gave me the absolute best seat in the entire house to watch your fake empire crumble into dust. Nia, I am begging you, Andre screamed, his voice breaking, as he reached out toward my designer trench coat one last time. I am going to a federal prison. I will not survive in there. You have to save me. I already saved the only two people in this family who actually mattered, I replied coldly. I saved myself and I saved my son. You are entirely on your own. I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on the pathetic, weeping man kneeling in the flooded concrete plaza. I walked smoothly toward my waiting vehicle, my high heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the wet pavement. My private security guards moved in perfect synchronization, opening the heavy door of my sleek black SUV. I climbed inside the warm, luxurious cabin and settled into the plush leather seat. I did not look out the tinted passenger window. Just as my driver shifted the heavy vehicle into gear to pull away from the curb, a blinding flash of red and blue emergency lights suddenly illuminated the dark, stormy street. 3 unmarked federal law enforcement vehicles aggressively swerved around the corner, their sirens blaring loudly over the crashing thunder. They slammed on their brakes, coming to a violent halt directly behind my departing SUV. 4 heavily armed agents jumped out into the pouring rain. They marched straight toward the shivering, defeated man still kneeling helplessly on the cold concrete. They grabbed Andre roughly by his soaked shoulders and yanked him to his feet. The lead agent pulled out a pair of heavy silver handcuffs, loudly announcing the official federal arrest warrant for massive corporate wire fraud and grand embezzlement. He screamed as the cold metal snapped securely around his wrists. It was the absolute perfect end to his fake existence.